Welcome to something a little bit different, because this is the Mercedes-Benz GLB, and it's basically a Mercedes-Benz A-Class with a longer wheelbase, an SUV body style and 7 seats. And I'm just trying to think, what are the actual rivals to this car? There's the BMW 2 Series Grand Tourer with its 7 seats, and then that's about it. Either way, we've got a couple of hours with this car on the international launch in Spain, so let's find out if it's worth your cash. Climb behind the wheel of the GLB, and unsurprisingly, the cabin layout and style will be familiar to anyone who's ever sat in an A-Class or a B-Class or a CLA or any other car that shares this platform. But crucially, it does have some nods to the G-Class in here, so it feels a bit chunky, a bit more utilitarian with these grab handles and the shelf there and the brushed metal. It just feels that bit more rugged, and that's a nice touch in a car of this size and price range. There's obviously more headroom as well. There's tons more headroom than you get in an A-Class. There's a lot more space out back, although we'll get onto that in a second. As far as the trim levels go, this is obviously the GLB, or the Mercedes-AMG GLB 35, so it's the top level trim level, it's the flagship, and it's the most expensive. But if you want a regular GLB, then you've got the trim levels as follows. You've got Sport, then you've got AMG Line, then you've got AMG Line Premium, and then you've got AMG Line Premium Plus. And the one you want, or at least the least level that you want, so anything above AMG Line Premium, is where you should be aiming for, because you get the 10.25 inch screens here, the dual 10.25 inch screens, instead of the smaller 7 inch units, which don't quite look as smart. And obviously the system behind that is the same software that you get in the A-Class, so it's the MBUX software. And although it's not quite as easy to use as Audi's infotainment system perhaps, and it's not as well laid out, the graphics are very crisp. It does a lot of things. The functionality is huge, and the software is nice and fast as well. So it does add to the feeling of this cabin being very premium, and that you're getting your money's worth in here. Get into the back of the GLB, and for a car that's based on the same platform as the A-Class, it's really quite shocking how much space you've got back here, because although, you know, the A-Class, it's a hatchback, there's only a certain amount of room you can get from a hatchback, but with this, I've got tons of foot room, knee room, leg room, headroom is excellent as well, and it just feels really airy and spacious. You can also adjust the backrest, and you can also move the seats forwards and back to change how much boot space you get, or how much space there is for those in the third row. And talking of the third row of seats, as you can see, we've had to get into a different GLB because that one, which is over there, didn't have the third row of seats fitted. But with this car that does, I've got to say, with this second row in its most forward position, you need it there, otherwise there is no legroom at all. But with it there, I'm not that uncomfortable. I'm about average height for a male, and if I just slouch down a little bit, I can actually sit here, and I could probably survive a half-hour journey back here without getting completely fed up. It's not as spacious, obviously, as a dedicated 7-seater, but you know what? It's perfectly acceptable for what it needs to do. We've also got ISOFIX points back here as well on both seats. There's cup holders as well. There's a space to put your reflective jacket if you want that. There's also a USB-C point too. It really is actually a pleasant surprise with how much space I'm getting here. Now, as you'll have noticed from the title of this video, this isn't any old Mercedes GLB. It's actually the Mercedes AMG GLB 35. So it's the performance model. It's got the same 306 horsepower, 2-litre turbocharged petrol as the AMG A35. And in a straight line, at least, it's not that far off the A35. I mean, obviously it's heavier, it's more slab-sided, it's not as aerodynamic, so it's never going to be quite the same. But if you want a 7-seat SUV that really flies along when you put your foot down, then, well, this thing fills the brief and some. There's the augmented engine sound as well, but there's a nice sort of induction-y whoosh when you put your foot down in gear, which sort of harks back to a 90s rally car. Obviously it's far removed from that, but at least you can pretend when you're out on the road and you're just doing your daily commute and it feels like you're in something which has actually got some serious guts under the bonnet. I mean, honestly, this will absolutely embarrass the quickest 2 Series Grand Tour you can get. And even if we sort of look at the same price range and go for, say, a Skoda Kodiaq VRS, it's noticeably quicker than that. It is smaller, but it has a lot more power with it. As for cornering, well, we found a quite twisty but very tight piece of Spanish road here, and I've got to say, you can feel the 4MATIC all-wheel drive system. You can feel it shuffling the power around when you're accelerating out of a corner and making sure you've got plenty of grip, and you do, because you can actually take a surprising amount of speed through a corner considering how big this thing is. But you're never going to get away from the fact that it is big and that it feels it in some situations. There is roll, there is noticeable roll, but for a 7-seater, for something as practical as this, it hangs on well. You know what? You could actually have some fun if you temper your expectations accordingly. Once you calm down and stop driving like a hooligan, you can cycle through the various drive modes that this car's got, and because it's the AMG, we've got them on the steering wheel here. So there is the slippery drive mode that you first saw in the Mercedes AMG A35, so that's for wet weather driving conditions. We've also got individual, so you can customize how you want it with the suspension, the throttle response, the steering. Then, of course, there's the comfort setting, which you'd use for every day, Sport and Sport Plus. And it's the comfort mode that I want to talk about, because at some point you will have to stop driving like a hooligan and drive it sensibly, because after all it is a 7-seater and you might want to put 7 people in this car, obviously. And when you put it in comfort, you'll notice that there is a compromise with what the ride quality is like. It's not the end of the world, it's kind of where you'd expect it to be, but this car does have sizable 20-inch alloy wheels, and they do make themselves felt over expansion joints, over cracks in the road, even with the suspension in its softest setting. But saying that, on the motorway over here, it was a perfectly good cruising companion. There's a bit more wind noise than perhaps you'd expect, but then it's not the most aerodynamic looking thing in the world, as we've said. But the important thing is that you could forget that you've got the performance version. It's got that dual personality that you need in a car like this. You know, I'm really rather pleased that Mercedes has made this GLB 35, because it's difficult to make a 7-seater interesting. They're not usually the most exciting cars, but the GLB, well, it looks different. It kind of looks like a mini G-Wagon in some ways. It's got that GLB 35 performance version. And I think the key question you've got to ask is, do you want a 7-seater? Do you need 7 seats? And then if the answer is yes, this car instantly has the answer for you, unlike a lot of 5-seat rival cars that are around this size and price range. And also, if you're going to buy a larger 7-seater around this price range, so say a Tiguan Allspace, think, well, how often do I need those rear row seats? Because if you don't need them that often, it's really exceptional occasions that they'll be used, then why not get one of these? It's got that flexibility, yet it's still an interesting, nice to drive, nice interior Mercedes-Benz.